Hi, everybody. We are looking at chapter 13 today related to stress and health. Hopefully, you don't feel like this poor guy right here, but we'll look at what is stress and stressors. What is the stress response system? How does it affect our health? We'll look at some examples of extreme stress, how we cope, and then hopefully some tips for staying healthy. So, that is our topic for today. And stress is something that we all experience, right? Unfortunately, it is just a reality of life. It's a state of psychological tension or strain. It's a way that we perceive and respond to events around us. Stress arises more from like how we appraise an event than the event itself. And really the evidence of that is that everybody can experience the exact same event and experience it in a very different way, right? What stresses one person out might not stress out another. You need a little bit of stress in order to be motivated. Stress can actually be a really good thing as it pushes us into action, but too much stress can be damaging or harmful. And we'll talk about both sides of that. When we're talking about the realm of stress, we're in the branch of health psychology, a subfield that is concerned with our relationship between psychological factors like stress and physical health and illness. I love that I'm talking to you about health and illness as I'm coughing. Anyway, a stressor is what is any kind of environmental demand that's going to create a state of tension or threat requiring change or adaptation. And stressors can be literally anything. So these are our sources of stress. And it can be anything from an exam to technology to traffic to scheduling and timing, change, everyday hassles. We can create our own stress in the ways that we think about the world. It could obviously be an event, even a positive event could be stressful, like a wedding, for example, or a graduation. So stressors can literally be anything, and we all experience them. There's nothing wrong with having stress. We just don't want to have it cripple us because too much stress can be somewhat damaging. And obviously, extreme stress is a little different than kind of our typical everyday sort of stuff. So, whenever we experience any kind of stress in our lives, we do have a very clear response that happens in our body. We have a stress response and a stress response system. Now, all of this tends to start with a small little structure called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, which you can see here on this image, right, links the nervous and endocrine systems together. It regulates body homeostasis or balance. It tends to kind of kick into gear a chain reaction of events whenever we are stressed out. So what it does is it kind of activates and then it will arouse or activate our nervous system. And our nervous system, which we've talked about a couple of times, the sympathetic nervous system is the part in charge of fight or flight. So whenever we have any kind of stressor, this is going to be kicked into gear, causing all sorts of different neurotransmitters to be released, like norepinephrine, for example. Hormones are also released into our from our glands and into our bloodstream. And so we become kind of aroused, right? We're geared up or ready to fight off a stressor. And then whenever the stressor has passed, the parasympathetic nervous system comes in and is in charge of resting and digesting. It calms us down, helps us to reset and kind of everything resetting back to our baseline. So there are a lot of physical effects of stress. It affects digestion, it affects heart rate, it affects blood pressure, it affects breathing, sweating, and respiration. All these different things are affected because when we're stressed out, there are physical and chemical responses coursing through our system, which then can lead to all sorts of different outcomes. Stress can obviously then affect health, right? When people have stress all the time, this can lead to health issues. And there's this thing called the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS. According to psychologist Hans Selye, we go through three distinct stages as our body adapts and passes through our reactions to stress. The first is that alarm reaction, right? The hypothalamus going off, all of our different systems kind of being activated, right? It's like a little like flashing bulb that goes off of like, hey, stress, we need to react. And then our body resists, right? We release all those neurotransmitters and hormones. We pour all of those different things out so that we can cope with the stressor, both physically and psychologically. And then in the end, we have the stage of exhaustion where our reserves are a little bit depleted. Our body can only fight something for so long before exhaustion sets in. And when exhaustion sets in, that's when we start to see things like headaches and stomach aches and different signs of physical or even mental illness. When we hit that point of exhaustion consistently or constantly, it can lead to things like heart disease, right? A clogging of the vessels that nourish the heart, high blood pressure, high heart rate. All of those things are very common when people are stressed pretty consistently. It can lead to illnesses such as high blood pressure, headaches like migraines are very commonly correlated to stress. We are more likely to get sick. Right? You'll notice during finals week or during like times of high stress, people are always sniffling and coughing, right? There's a whole branch of psychology called PNI or psychoneuroimmunology that looks at how does the immune system get impacted by things such as stress and these different endocrine processes that we undergo. And stress, I want to be very clear, does not cause cancer or AIDS or anything like that, but it can progress the rate at which those things are moving, right? So somebody can go from HIV to AIDS due to stress or have cancer progress faster because of stress. So typically stress management is part of like a care routine when people have like a bigger illness or issue going on. There's also incidences of extreme stress. So we're kind of been talking about typical stress, which can be chronic or short-lived, but there are times where people experience like an extreme stressor, something that we could consider trauma. And in this case, we typically call it big T trauma because it might be something like an attack or witnessing a traumatic event or some kind of an assault, right? And what we see is that when people experience a traumatic event, it's almost like it haunts them in a way, right? It causes anxiety and sleeplessness and nightmares. They persistently re-experience the event. And this could be flashbacks or smells kind of triggering memories or sounds or times of day. People are often like very edgy. They're on edge, which we call hypervigilance, making it hard to sleep, maybe making them very angry or irritable. This has to last at least a month, but it typically can last for years for people. And I have this image of Katniss down here. Katniss from the Hunger Games movies or books, great example of someone who experienced extreme stress or trauma leading to PTSD. Lots of examples of these, like The Punisher, Brothers, right? Another great movie highlighting this. Lots of different movies and TV shows highlighting incidences where people are kind of haunted by or persistently re-experiencing some kind of stress or trauma. Also, kind of related to this, there's a disorder called complex PTSD or C-PTSD. And this isn't technically recognized by the DSM as of the moment when I'm making this video, but it will be in the future. This is sometimes called like developmental trauma or complex trauma. This is when people experience a bunch of smaller traumas, little t trauma, as we might call them, typically during childhood. Oftentimes, this is related to things like attachment or maybe a lack of safety, neglect are very common as a child. And what this tends to do is lead to long-term changes, like a negative self-perception, emotional flashbacks, flashbacks where you kind of are back into an emotional reaction or adverse circumstance from childhood, struggles with emotion regulation and relationships, changes in consciousness, sometimes destructive or risky behaviors. It's this whole profile of different reactions that come from ongoing smaller traumatic events that typically happen in childhood. And with both of these, they both tend to require therapy, which we'll talk more about in a later unit, kind of going back and working through or facing the traumatic events. And that can be incredibly helpful for working through and kind of resolving some of that trauma. In terms of coping with stress, it is important to cope, right? So we're going to have stress. We need to find ways to cope with it. We can generally cope in two different ways. We can cope directly or defensively. And when we directly cope with something, we make an intentional effort to change it, right? We can confront it head on, right? I'm going to tackle this situation head on. I'm going to try and find a solution. You can compromise. So maybe it isn't always possible to have like the ideal situation. So you make some kind of practical like compromise that makes things a little bit more doable. Sometimes people also withdraw as a way to directly cope, right? They literally avoid the situation because that's the only thing that they can do. With all of these, you're trying to make an intentional effort to change it. Maybe it's making a list and tackling things one thing at a time. Maybe it is like taking a nap, right? That's your way of withdrawing and taking a quick break, right? So you're making some kind of intentional effort. You can also defensively cope. And sometimes we can't identify or deal with the source of our stress directly, right? And if that's the case, we might use things like defense mechanisms, denial, repression, regression. There's a bunch of these, reaction formation. We might kind of deceive ourselves into reducing our stress through a more like defensive or indirect sort of manner. Whatever you do to cope with your stress, it is really important to cope and to try and balance stress with kind of more positive pursuits or things that make you feel good or release stress for you. Really important to try and find that balance. Things that tend to influence how we cope with stress, how much control we have. Sometimes we don't have control, right? Like right now, I feel like I'm in a situation where I don't have a lot of control over my stress because I can't get rid of it. Sometimes you could just have to accept it, right? And so the amount of control that we have or the way that we view or perceive something can drastically affect the way that we react to it and how it influences us. Our explanatory style also plays a big role. Are we optimistic or pessimistic? Do we see things as half empty or half full, or maybe just realist, right? And half. But the way that we view things can also play a big role in how we experience stress. Finally, social support, right? Do you have other people who you can talk to, who you can rely on, who can help you with your stress? Social support tends to be a really positive indicator for helping people to cope, right? The more social support we have, the better that we tend to do. A couple of things in terms of staying healthy, kind of general tips, but finding ways to calm down is really, really important. And I wrote that whole book about self-care and mindfulness because mindfulness is a huge part of kind of being present and calming down and accepting things as they are. So finding ways to calm down and relax, whether that's through exercise or meditation or yoga or naps or different self-care practices. Reaching out to other people. We just said social support is a big one. Reaching out and connecting with others, having friends and family and those who can support you. A lot of people find peace and health in religion and altruism, connecting to or believing in something bigger than yourself, giving to other people. All of those things can be very kind of protective factors. Learning to cope effectively, right? When you have a bunch of stressors, instead of shutting down or letting them cripple you or make you angry or cranky or irritable, making a list, prioritizing things, right? Trying to find that balance and learning to find effective ways to cope. Maybe it's exercise, right? That's here on the slide. Maybe exercise allows you to release some of that energy, or maybe it is some kind of guided meditation, or it's going on a walk, or taking a nap, or having your favorite snack. But finding ways to practice self-care, mindfulness, adopting a healthy lifestyle, finding ways to calm down. And I think accepting too that stress is going to be part of your life and you just have to kind of change the way that you view it can also be really, really helpful. One last thought here. There's kind of a branch of psychology that helps with some of those kind of topics that we just went into. Complementary and alternative medicine. These are things like homeopathy, herb-based things, yoga, Reiki, massage, right? Alternative medical systems, different ways to kind of approach health and well-being. And these are things that might not be traditionally taught in schools or used in hospitals or reimbursed by insurance companies, but they do tend to be really helpful in like helping people to have like a more holistic approach to their health. So finding ways to have balance or look at energy in your life or yoga or meditation, diet, herbs, like all those kind of things can be really, really helpful as kind of complementary ways to approach stress. So that is chapter 13 on stress and health. As always, usual reminders, don't forget to read chapter 13 in the ebook. Don't forget to also go through the lecture for chapter 13. All of that together is going to help you to understand the materials. And I will see you all next time for our next chapter, which is chapter 14 related to psychological disorders.